Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with SAG-AFTRA Foundation, and thank you so much for tuning in to watch another one of our Conversations at Home videos today. I want to continue reminding everyone watching these videos that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit organization, and during this time, we're continuing to raise funds for a COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund. This fund is really working to help support actors who are currently out of work due to all of the closed film and television productions at the moment, with paying rent, making mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries, whatever it is they need to get by day to day at the moment. So please check out the details below and consider supporting if you're able to in any way. Today it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the wonderful Matt Bomer, currently starring in season 3 of The Sinner, which is a very intense binge watch to have these days, especially. I wanted to just kind of start by asking you about your day-to-day in quarantine. I feel like at this point we're a couple months in and we've all adapted to a different version of what our days and our weeks look like. And I was interested in what the facets are from the last couple of months are that you've actually really enjoyed and that you hope you're able to hold on to once we're back out in the world again.
Oh, well, for me, the biggest reward, the nicest thing has been the uninterrupted family time. As an artist, it's so rare that I get to be in one place undistracted for such a long period of time. So the time we've spent with our kids, with our family, has just been incredible. And just an opportunity to give back and come together, you know, and I really do. I think one of the first events I did was We're All in This Together. You know, it was the big event Lady Gaga put together. And I really have tried to take that to heart and tried to connect with people and find ways to reach out and help where I can. And so there has been, you know, it's been hard. It's been hard for everybody, certainly homeschooling 3 kids and, you know, just taking over responsibilities and teaching responsibility in a different way has had its ups and downs, but overall just getting that family time together and getting a chance to give back has been great.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've had that in amongst everything else that's going on right now. And to jump in with the show, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you first came onto the project, because you and Derek Simons had a pre-existing relationship from him producing Call Me By Your Name. And I wanted to ask how important that was to you, because you really jumped in with very little framework of even who this character was at that point. There weren't any scripts when you said yes to it. So what that balance of decision-making and jumping onto a project like this was in terms of your relationship with Derek, and also just looking to the previous seasons, even though it is an anthology series, it really sets the tone for season 3.
Yeah, well, I guess first and foremost, I was a huge fan of the show. The work they had done on the first 2 seasons speaks volumes, and I knew that it was going to be a very deep psychological dive, and that it was a story that would be given great care and attention. And I knew from meeting with Derek on Call Me By Your Name that we had a very easy rapport creatively, that we approached the work in a similar way. He was working in ways, particularly in the dream work, which is an aspect of the work he brings to the table. It was something I was really curious about and had just started working with at the time. And so I knew, you know, as an actor, there are times you get an opportunity to play a part where you're going to have to dig really deep and do things you've never had to do before that you're not even sure if you can. So it was important to me that I was in Derek's hands, because I knew how much he loved the story and I knew how invested he was in it, even from the beginning stages.
Yeah, and because you mentioned how he loves to utilize dream work as a creative process, I know that you and the rest of the cast did kind of a dream workshop where you were sharing a lot of, you know, information and details from your own selves with each other. And I was curious about what that workshop actually looked like and how it really helped you in terms of uncovering aspects of your character, but also once you stepped onto set, the way in which it really fed into the creative process, particularly with the rest of the cast, because I imagine that built a huge amount of trust with everybody.
It was incredible and invaluable. It was really taught by Derek, the creator, and this woman, amazing woman, Kim Gillingham. And first and foremost, it's all about kind of getting out of your head and bringing something from your subconscious into the work, which I feel really bleeds into the work in ways that seem almost imperceptible at the time, but then have a more profound influence once you're there on set. But even more importantly, we were doing these exercises with our fellow cast members, where we're having to be really open and vulnerable and raw in front of each other. And it let me know what an incredible ensemble of actors they had put together this season. And it also just stripped down any walls between us, so that there was a sense of trust and a sense of mutual support for each other when we came to the set, and a sense of what we wanted to bring to the table for our character and how that interplayed with what the other actors wanted to bring. And so oftentimes, this show films very fast. And so to have that trust going into it, I felt was just invaluable. And you could feel it on the first day when we were working together. And oftentimes you're spending the first couple weeks breaking down those walls before you really feel like you can engage that way. And you're just kind of having to be really courageous when it comes to your coverage. But in this particular instance, it really felt like an ensemble experience from the get-go.
Was it particularly useful in terms of a lot of the scenes with your character where we're straddling between his reality and his subconscious? Because there's so many times where we're witnessing things that are actually just happening in his imagination, particularly when he's seeing Chris Messina's character. And so did it feed into those scenes even more so than other moments in the show?
Yeah, I always say this season is a little bit Macbeth, a little bit Hamlet, and a little bit Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, all as interpreted by Patricia Highsmith. So the dream work is great, not only in what you're speaking about, but also just in terms of what was going on beneath the surface with Jamie, both in terms of his dissociation with reality, but also what is he suppressing underneath this facade. So much about the character, especially in the beginning of the season, is the person he presents to the world and the person he's experiencing on the inside. And they are at odds with each other, and they're really coming to a boiling point. And so a lot of it was figuring out what he was struggling with, what he was feeling, what he was experiencing. And the most important thing about the work, I feel, is that, you can approach any role from a very intellectual, analytical place, but it really gets you into your whole body and kind of out of just coming at it intellectually. So little things will happen in a take, and no two takes are really the same. And especially when you're working with somebody else from the workshop, you just felt this sense to go anywhere with a scene from the time they called action to when they called cut. And so it's very permissive, because you tap into something that you can't really intellectualize, but you feel it and you experience it.
Yeah, and I love the way that you mentioned the particularly shooting scenes with Chris Messina, that the two of you kind of had this understanding of you never knew where the scene was going to go with each other. And so did that really just kind of open up a massive amount of freedom to really play around? And did you try a lot of different choices when you were creating those scenes together, particularly the more extreme ones?
Yes. It was amazing to get to work with Chris and Parisa and Bill and everyone across the board. I think we all felt that sense in every scene we did, that we didn't know where it was going to go. I felt like it was particularly valuable in the scenes with Chris, because so much of their relationship was about that thrill of pushing yourself to the edge and how far can you go. And that's where their relationship sings. That's where they feed off of each other. So Chris was amazing. He came to the table and you didn't know what he was going to do. I mean, there's stuff on the cutting room floor that's just incredible and strange and crazy. And that fed me to then want to feed off of that and do the same on my coverage. And it was just this dance. It was this high stakes dance that, if it went the wrong direction would be horrible. But then when the chemistry worked, it brought a whole new life to the scene. So I love getting to work with him, and so many of those scenes were so raw and wild and unpredictable. And I loved it particularly for that relationship, because, like I said, that's how they fed off of each other. That's why their relationship was the most profound relationship Jamie had ever experienced, because he really felt like with this person, I'm alive.
Yeah, and it seems like so much of that would come from Derek and the way that he worked with you all, and kind of knowing some of the details about how he wanted to work with you and the rest of the cast coming into it. Did that shift and change the amount of work that you did in preparing some of the details for this character before stepping onto set versus what you allowed yourself to really just find and discover in the moment, given that there was more fluidity to that process?
Yes and no. I felt like the work really sang when it was a combination of everyone doing their thing. Look, having Derek be your eminence mauve and being the person who's there with you, supporting you from the get-go to the final frame, is one of the most incredible things I've ever experienced. It's just such a rarity in episodic television to have a creator who is that hands-on and who cares about the story that much. And so we would debrief for at least 2-3 hours every episode and just talk about what was going on with Jamie. I think what was so important in those conversations for me was staying in the point of view that he wanted for the character and trying to find ways to keep him human and not go over an edge that would make the audience just not want to experience his story anymore. So, and then the great thing about Derek was it wasn't like he had your hands tied at that point. He was just giving you a sense of the character's point of view and permission, so that when you got on set, you were free to operate sort of within those parameters, and then also to surprise him as well. He's not somebody who's overly precious about it either. So I love the whole experience. I mean, I come from the theater where rehearsal is so important, and collaborating with your director and finding a real vision for the piece is so important. And oftentimes in episodic television, you can be left to your own devices just because time is so precious and there's so little of it. So the fact that I got to work so closely with Derek and these other actors and felt free to try anything and discuss anything with them was really, it's something I'll appreciate for the rest of my career.
Yeah. And was the experience of filming that final episode something different because Derek was directing it? It was the first episode actually of the show that he's ever shot himself. And I imagine that was really key and really helpful, especially in terms of that final scene and those final moments and the emotional headspace that scene was particularly asking you to get to. And so I was interested in just kind of like filming that episode with Derek to begin with, but also especially that moment.
Yeah, that was unforgettable. Those are those scenes that you spend 5 months leading up to. And so you don't want to come into it with anything over, you want to know where you are emotionally, what's going on in the scene, lines obviously, but you don't want to have a sense of how the scene's going to turn out. And you're just so grateful that you're working with an amazing actor like Bill Pullman, who's going to be there to support you. And Derek was phenomenal in that scene. Particularly in the last moments for the character. It was the last day of filming. It was the last thing we were filming. I think they shot one little quick thing with Bill when I was finished. But, everyone's got a little bit of like summer fever, they're like, ready. It's been 5.5 months of really hard work, or 5 months, whatever it was. And so he really focused the entire crew in. And the crew on the show is phenomenal as well, and they were really invested in the story. And he just asked everyone there to support me. And I'd never had anything like that happen on a set before, where the crew was invited into the process, but I felt it. And I think everybody who was on set felt that sense of support. And I really think it fed this work. In a really positive way. I hope that more directors feel that they can invite the crew into that, these particularly private moments, to give them the respect and the sort of space they need to work.
Yeah, it sounds like such an obvious thing to be able to do once you say it out loud and once you've experienced it. One of the things that I was really curious about in terms of your performance and this character in particular is the places that you had to take yourself emotionally, and the journey that he goes on, and the actions that we see exhibited through this character being so extreme, you make so many important and bold choices in the way that you perform it, and it's thrilling to watch. But I'm curious about that process when you're having to make such bold and decisive choices for a character, what that balance and check is for yourself in figuring out what's going to work, because there's a huge risk to it. It's like, if it works, it's going to be brilliant, and if it doesn't land, it's going to be very obvious to everybody. So how do you kind of set about navigating and figuring out what's really going to work and what's going to land and still fit within the character as well?
Well, you just said it, really. Because I think oftentimes the most valuable things happen when you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to, but you still have the courage to try to be present when the cameras roll. And this whole role for me was an exercise, one, in trying to stay in Jamie's head and in his point of view, so that I never got outside the character and started to judge him. And two, I would say even bigger, it was really having to drop caring about what the crew thought of me, what my fellow actors thought of me, what anyone thought about what I was doing, because I had to give myself permission to fail. And I did at times. I think there are scenes where, like the scene where Jamie's going crazy and throwing chairs around in that hallway by himself. And you can't plan that. You have to know everything that's going on with your character, but you have to just be willing to surprise yourself in those moments and do takes where, okay, that's not it. Let's try again. And then surprise yourself in another direction. And I think the camera picks up on that. And, I was actually really inspired watching Joaquin Phoenix in The Joker, because I know that's kind of a part of his process that I've heard him speak about before, is really not knowing and giving yourself permission to surprise yourself as you go. And I think that was an important part of playing this role. Not that we had a lot of time. I typically had, 2 or 3 takes. So I had, a take to gamble and then another take to gamble, and then we were moving on for the most part. But I think it was important in a role like this, where a character is doing these unconscionable deeds and behaving in very erratic and questionable ways, to let it surprise and scare myself as it was happening as well.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting, because all of these physical behaviors and actions are all driven by such an internal journey. So how did you think about the way that you really wanted to capture the internalized journey and that internal struggle that he's going through constantly, but to manifest it in a physical sense?
Well, the interesting thing about the dream work is that little physical behaviors can come from the dreams you do, and sort of bringing little gestures from the dream into your character and into the work there. Jamie is someone who has such a wild internal life going on, particularly at the beginning, that I almost wanted his physical life to be, much more still and internal at the beginning. And then as he starts to give in to these impulses and desires and find this freedom in the acts he's doing, I wanted his physical life to loosen up as well. And really, honestly, once we did the scene where Chris cut my hair, it was kind of a turning point for him, emotionally and physically. That's kind of what I wanted it all, where we wanted it all to culminate. And it really became a different experience filming after that as well, I would say.
Yeah, and you've mentioned previously how with the show and the way that it films with short lenses, that, for close-up scenes in particular, that really requires the camera to be right in front of you, which is then just physically blocking off you even seeing your scene partner or any of the external things around you. So did that force you to kind of like focus on your performance in an internal way, in a different way to when you've done other projects in the past?
Well, when the lens is, 6 inches from your face, you just have to have the courage to try to be in it as much as you possibly can, because you cannot lie to the camera can't lie to the camera anyway, but you really can't do it when it's that close. So I think, again, it was just an exercise in dropping judgments about myself or what anyone thought about me, and trying to stay in the moment, and also to use anything that was happening, that was going on in the moment while we were filming. If I felt like someone wasn't paying attention and it was an angry scene, to let that get me angry, or if to use things that were right there to help me, and to also, particularly when you can't see an actor, to pay really close attention in rehearsal to what they're doing, pay close attention on their coverage if they go first, and then to just endow whatever the mark you had to look at, or with whatever I wanted them to be or needed them to be saying for me to respond.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much that you capture in your performance as well, from this whole emotional journey that he's been going on for the last 15 years. And I was interested in the way that the flashback scenes were a useful tool to you, not just beyond the scripts, but if you had an opportunity to connect with the actor that was playing your younger self, and to really align the way that you were both capturing this character so that they were really in sync with each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. This has happened to me twice now. I did a film with Bill Pullman, actually, where he played my father in flashbacks. And the actor they cast as my son, Josh Wiggins, was from my same little area outside of Houston in Texas. And the actor they cast to play the younger version of me in this is also from my same little area outside of Houston in Texas. And neither casting person knew when they cast the role. So there was all kinds of weird synchronicity going on. And that was another thing. I don't mean to sound overly esoteric, but when you do the dream thing together, all these weird synchronistic things start happening. And things fortuitously work out in a great way that I hadn't ever really experienced on a set before. So we had a shared sense of background, and we just were able to FaceTime briefly. He came in really quick, and it was one of the few days I had a half day off, or a day off maybe, when they were filming their scenes together. So we just powwowed really quick over FaceTime. But he was so, and I also spoke with the actor who plays Nick, and they had seen the first 2 episodes already, which is more than Chris and I had seen at that point. So they had a sense of what we were trying to do together and how it was edited together to show the relationship they wanted for the show. And I think they were very studious about that. And then we just chatted, and I answered any questions they had, which were very few, and they just went in and nailed it.
Yeah, it's amazing the way that they line up together. They did such a great job. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the overall tone and suspense that's created in the show, because it's so amazing. Like, you feel it in every single scene that you're watching. And is that something that you allow yourself to feed into and think about how you're going to play that into your performance? Or is that really just something that comes through the characters and the way that they're written on this show?
Oh, well, so much of the show is about the human psyche and the shadow side of the human psyche that's in all of us. And it's about trauma and the repression of trauma, and the dangers of repression, and how do we heal it, and what happens if we externalize it in the wrong way. So I think a lot of the psychological tension that you feel in the show is in the writing. One of the things that I think makes Derek a creator that every actor, I'll be jealous of any actor who gets to work with him, and every actor should hope to work with him. He gives you such a sense of taking your time in a scene. Nothing needs to be rushed. No reaction. Somebody can say their line, and you can take 5, 6 seconds, 10 seconds if you need to get to the next space. No one's ever forced into any kind of false rhythm for the sake of time or for the sake of the cut. And there's something about the permission to hold a moment, particularly in a character like Jamie, before you respond, and to choose when you respond quickly and when you take your time, and to have the permission to have these extended internal moments with the camera in your face. I think that creates a certain level of unease in a good way in the audience when they're watching.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about the toll that playing this character took on you, because you're acting out these moments, but I think a lot of actors talk about how your body doesn't know the difference. It's still kind of living out that trauma, that stress, that anxiety, those feelings. And particularly in terms of this show, because you're filming it on location, so you're in that bubble where you don't have the escapism of just going home at the end of the night. You're really kind of living and breathing in a character in a different way. So how did you navigate kind of staying connected to the character and really staying in those moments, but also setting some boundaries where you were able to step away at the moments that you needed to for yourself?
I probably could have set some healthier boundaries, to be honest with you. I was so grateful that I was on location, because it was very helpful to give myself as much space as I needed to stay with the character when I needed to. I think if I'd had to come home every day and then help my kids with homework or something like that, I think it would have been, I don't know, maybe it would have been healthier, maybe it would have been harder. I don't know, I can't say, but I was glad, just considering everything that Jamie was thinking about, and the fact that, I was walking around and starting to see, I'd be at the airport and I'd start to look at people on their cell phones, talking distractedly or being rude to somebody, and just starting to see the world through his eyes, where I thought, whoa, okay, Matt, time to play some happy music in your headphones and just go for a walk. I think one thing I tried to do, because they would be really long days. Oftentimes our set was an hour away. So by the time I get home, it would be up to 16, 17 hours with the character. And then I'd have to spend, an hour, sometimes more, on the material for the next day. So it was very important for me at a certain point to just kind of take walks at the end of the day, let it go, do some type of meditation or relaxation before I went to bed, and just kind of give myself permission, at least when I slept, although sometimes I was trying to do dream work as well, to give myself a little bit of space. I don't think it really sunk in with me until we were finishing up how into my tissues it had gone, just because I'd lost, close to 20 pounds over the course of filming. And when we finished, I think within an hour of calling the last cut, I completely lost my voice for 2 weeks. I had no voice. My body was pretty racked, and, I had to go straight home into the holidays with my family. So it was quite a gear shift. And I was trying to just be patient with myself and give myself a little permission to have my moments. But I was grateful to get to go back to my family. And I felt like right as I was getting the stress and the anxiety of Jamie out of my system, everything that's happened in our world started happening. So, but I think I had a little routine where I kind of said goodbye to Jamie, and it was, I think, a healthy way to bring closure to the experience.
Do you have a routine where you say goodbye to each of your characters at the end of wrapping a project in that way?
Sometimes. I think it depends on the project. It depends on how deep you have to go, on how much it costs you, on how much of yourself you have to bring to it. Because at a certain point, regardless of how collaborative people around you are, it really is an experience between the two of you, between the role you're playing and you, and what you're trying to bring to it. And you want to honor that in whatever way you can. And this was definitely one of those where I needed to thank the work and thank the role, and then bring some closure to it and let it go. I didn't keep any of Jamie's things. In fact, I actually went and I can't believe I'm telling you this. I'm only telling you this because it's SAG and actors will understand. But I actually took his wedding ring and just went and threw it in the Hudson River, and just kind of said goodbye that way. It wasn't a role that as much as I loved playing it and was so grateful for the experience, and I will always, carry it with me. I wanted to just not keep garments or props or anything at the end, but just have a nice, healthy goodbye.
It's the joy of an anthology series. That you can really say goodbye.
Exactly.
I love the way that you mention in the past how with every single character you play that you feel like there's an opportunity to really learn something personal from them. And so I was interested kind of what your personal journey was in terms of what you feel that you learned from connecting to this character, even though he was so outside of yourself and who you are day to day.
Yeah, Jamie really is suffering from a profound sense of loneliness and spiritual disconnection. And he doesn't have the tools. He doesn't have any kind of spiritual practice. He doesn't have a way to deal with his existential crisis. He harbors a lot, he holds a lot in, and then oftentimes the relationships, particularly the male relationships that he does connect with, are toxic due to repressed trauma from earlier in his life. So I think what I learned from Jamie is that we should open up, especially as men. Doesn't matter who you are, where you fall on any kind of spectrum. We can hold things in and not want to talk about them and not want to express our fears and concerns. So for me, in a society where we are in a place where we're relying more on phones and technology to fill some kind of spiritual and psychological void in our lives, and we're displacing, values that we used to have maybe 50 years ago, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, to be able to connect with others in my life, to express my fears, my concerns about where we are, where we're going, and also to have some kind of spiritual practice in my own life to be able to cope when, unquestionable and unbelievable things happen, like what we're going through now. I mean, I look in the past few months, I've lost Mark Crowley, Terrence McNally, and now Larry Kramer as of yesterday, who were all heroes for me growing up. And I feel like they're all just leaving the building. And it hit me really hard yesterday. And it's one of those times when I thought about Jamie. And so I made sure I reached out to people and let them know I love them. And I was able to connect with Ryan Murphy and Mark Ruffalo and all the people I'd shared experiences with in the Normal Heart, and with my family as well. And to have some sense of a spiritual practice so I could, make sense of it all.
I'm so sorry for the losses that you've experienced during this time. And I'm so glad that you had that connectivity and that community around you. And I hope that remains intact for you over the coming weeks as we continue facing all of this.
And I hope that for all of us, truly.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's always great talking to you.